difference being reporting, I thought it would be good to start with our legislative reporting requirements. So we're going to start with that. We're going to talk about some different types of abuse and then talk about our reporting process. So when you make a report to the RHRA, I'll give you a bit of an idea of what happens behind the scenes and how that information is handled. We'll then talk about a little bit between the difference of our mandatory reports and our complaints program. And then I want to give you a little bit of information around inspections that we conduct following receipt of mandatory reports. And we'll round it out with a little information around our online database, which I'm excited to share with you, and hopefully you'll be able to visit and read some reports following this. So quickly, I just want to give you a little bit of information around the Retirement Homes Regulatory Authority. So for those of you who aren't aware, we are a not-for-profit corporation. We were created in 2010 following the Retirement Homes Act becoming law in Ontario. There is a fundamental principle of the Act, which I've put up on the screen, and I always think is important to consider. Really, that principle is that we want to ensure retirement homes in Ontario are a place where residents live with dignity, respect, privacy, and autonomy, in security, safety, and comfort, and can make informed choices about their care options. So it's important to think about that, and that's something that we at the RHRA always think about and view our work through that lens. RHRA administers the Retirement Homes Act on behalf of the Ontario Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility. And just to give you a high-level overview of some of the things that we do at the RHRA. So we license retirement homes to operate legally in Ontario. We do inspect homes regularly to ensure compliance. We provide compliance support and education to the sector. We enforce compliance when that's needed. We manage inquiries, a broad range of inquiries and complaints. And we develop and maintain key community partnerships throughout the province. Currently, RHRA has about 80 staff and about 19 inspectors. And RHRA is self-financed through our application and licensing fees. Okay, so to start the conversation off about reporting incidents that may be occurring in retirement homes, it's always good to start with the section of the legislation that actually requires individuals to report. So I've put the full language of that section of the Retirement Homes Act up on the screen, and it is under Section 75, which states that a person who has reasonable grounds to suspect any of the following has occurred or may occur shall immediately report that suspicion and the information upon which it is based to the RHRA. And you'll see it lists improper and incompetent care, abuse by anyone or neglect by staff, unlawful conduct, and misuse or misappropriation of money. And we'll definitely talk, we'll talk about each of those, starting with abuse, which you'll see is further in the presentation, one of the more commonly reported incidents. But it is important to think of this definition, and I've highlighted a couple key points here. Reasonable grounds to suspect. When we receive reports and information from the public, it does need to be founded in some reasonable grounds. So, we don't want to be receiving false or vexatious complaints or reports. We want there to be some information that supports why you suspect that one of these things may have occurred or may occur in the future. I've also highlighted immediately report, as that is really important, and especially for any retirement home operators who are on the call. We'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but the immediacy with which you report does factor into how we manage that information and determine what next steps should be taken. Okay, so to get into the different types of abuse, first I want to say that the definitions of abuse are outlined in Ontario Regulation 166-/11. And so I will go through and describe each of those types. And these definitions are unique to the Act. So you may have heard of these different types of abuse. You may have seen slightly different definitions of them, but I'm going to explain them to you as they are outlined in our legislation. So I've put physical abuse up there to start, and I think when a lot of us think of abuse, we think of something that is physical in nature. And so that's really the reason I've put that up as the first option. But there are two main qualifiers for physical abuse under our Act. One, it's either force by another resident of that home that causes injury to another resident, or it can be force by a non-resident that causes injury or pain. So the important distinction there is that if it is resident-to-resident abuse, there needs to be some injury that is experienced by the resident for it to meet that threshold of physical abuse. If it's forced by anyone other than a resident, if that force results in pain at a minimum for a resident, then that would meet the definition as well. I've put up here that physical abuse does not include force that is appropriate to the provision of care unless that force is excessive under the circumstances. So obviously, if you are a caregiver or a staff member at a home and you are supporting care, inevitably there will be some element of force that you are required to take to help support a resident through that care. However, it's important to ensure that is not excessive force. The next two types of abuse I've put up on the screen are emotional and verbal. And I've put them on the same slide because I think in many cases they are either confused or they're tied together very closely. So starting with emotional abuse, under our Act, that includes any threatening, insulting, intimidating or humiliating behavior or remarks, and includes social isolation of a resident, ignoring of a resident, and infantilization of a resident. If the emotional abuse is committed by another resident of the home, for it to meet the threshold of emotional abuse, that resident needs to understand and appreciate the consequences of their actions. Somewhat similar, verbal abuse includes threatening, intimidating, belittling, or degrading remarks, which diminish the sense of well-being, dignity, or self-worth of a resident of the home. And so you'll see there with verbal abuse, the threshold is a little bit higher because the definition is a little more specific as far as what the outcome needs to be for the resident. Similar to emotional abuse, if another resident is committing a verbal abuse, they need to understand and appreciate the consequences of what they're saying. And what they're saying needs to cause fear for safety in the other resident. So again, that's it's important context, and it highlights a little bit of the differences between verbal and emotional abuse. Okay, rounding out the definitions, we have sexual abuse. So that is any touching behavior or remarks of a sexual nature by a staff member, regardless of consent by a resident. It also includes anything of a sexual nature by someone other than a staff member, if it's non-consensual. Sexual abuse has some exceptions that are included in the definition. And one of them is that if it is a staff member that is alleged to have been sexually abusing a resident, the exception, we would not consider a consensual relationship between a staff member and a resident that started before that staff member was employed at the home or before that resident moved in or commenced residency at the home. We would not consider that sexual abuse. Also, sexual abuse does not include actions that are appropriate to provision of care. So obviously some residents are receiving support with personal care that involves intimate areas. And so as long as the actions are appropriate to that provision of care, any touching of that nature would be not considered sexual abuse. And then finally, we have financial abuse. So basically, financial abuse is any misuse or misappropriation of a resident's money. And the definition of financial abuse also includes personal property. And so when we think about personal property, I mean, our focus at the RHRA really is on essential items belonging to the resident that may impact the quality of their life if they are misused or if they are stolen or what have you. Okay, just to highlight a few of the other reportable matters that fall under Section 75. We have improper, incompetent care or treatment of a resident. And so that could be by a staff member of the home, but it also includes external care providers. So that's something where if you notice someone is providing care improperly or in a way that kind of impacts the resident's safety, health, or well-being, that may potentially fall under improper, incompetent care. There is also neglect, and that is specifically by the licensee or staff of the home. And while it can be viewed as similar to improper care, typically there's a higher threshold when we think about neglect. That's because neglect includes some inaction or pattern of inaction by the licensee or staff of the home that ultimately jeopardizes the health and safety of a resident. And then finally, we have unlawful conduct, which is a very broad term in some respects, but typically what we see and what we think about when we think of unlawful conduct are suspected criminal code violations. Okay, so just a couple things to consider when you are making a report to the RHRA under Section 75. Concerns that are reported need to involve a resident of the home as the recipient of the abuse or neglect or any of the other reportable matters. So I understand, we do hear from time to time of situations of resident to staff abuse, which of course is unfortunate and not something we would ever wish for, but it's not something that we explicitly can deal with under our jurisdiction. Concerns must also involve some element of harm or risk of harm for the resident or residents of the home. So again, it's important that when you're making that report, information you provide is includes what that risk of harm may be. I spoke a little bit before about reporting immediately. It is very important that RHRA becomes aware of these matters as soon as possible. And regardless of whether you are an operator, a family member, a resident, I do encourage you to report these matters immediately, because the quicker we hear about things, the quicker we're able to get someone assigned to the matter, potentially have someone sent out to the home to do an inspection or take some other action to ensure that residents are well protected. For operators specifically, one of the things we often see is reports being made quite a bit later than when the incident occurred or when they became aware of the incident. And so what I always recommend to operators is that when you immediately become aware of an incident, give us a heads up, start that reporting process. That doesn't stop you from going forward and conducting your own internal investigation into that matter and providing us with updates as we go. And lastly, I've put in there how important it is to provide supporting information. So again, regardless of who you are making the report, providing as much detail is really important for us and allows us to, again, identify what the key issues are and take kind of prompt and efficient action to address them. Okay, so as you've probably gathered by now, concerns that are reported under Section 75 are referred to as mandatory reports. I will explain the difference between a mandatory report and a complaint in a minute. Mandatory reports can be made anonymously. However, we generally see them not be made anonymously. That is not to say you can't. If you are reporting anonymously, or you would like to make a report and not have your name released to the home for any number of reasons, that is entirely appropriate and acceptable. I will say it is very helpful from our standpoint to at least have contact information for you that our inspector or other internal staff can use if we need to clarify information or ask a few additional questions. I will also say, and this is really important, that when you make an anonymous report, RHRA makes every effort to maintain that anonymity. So we, if we are sending an inspector into the home or if we are contacting the home in any way, we would not be releasing your name or information, and we would not be confirming for them who the source of the information was. That said, unfortunately, given the nature of some situations, we can't entirely prevent a home from concluding on their own who the source of that information was. Okay, so just to give you an idea of some of the volume around mandatory reports. Over the past year, we've received more than 1,400 mandatory reports. That represents a 25% increase from the previous year. And to give you an idea of some of the common concerns that we see reported, the top reported issue is resident-to-resident physical abuse. That I think has been the case for a while now. And as we've started to collect more information around these situations, what we've found is that in many cases, the reason that abuse is occurring is because the residents' care needs have evolved to a point where they are beyond the capacity of the home to manage. So whether that is, specific kind of aggressive or violent behaviors, whether that is, advanced dementia, typically, it is the escalating care needs of a resident and the inability of a home to properly manage those that we see as the root cause and source of a lot of these abuse incidents. We also see a high number of improper and incompetent care reports. Specifically, we see these relating to improper medication administration. So perhaps staff not following a physician's order or directions for medications properly. We also see a lot of incidents where it's alleged that staff have not followed a plan of care for a resident or providing a specific care service inappropriately. And then finally, we have neglect as our third most reported item. And really for this area, we see again, failure to provide medication administration, full stop. So forgetting to provide meds on a regular basis, and failure to provide continence care for those residents who are needing that service. I will say that a lot of these numbers are also reflected in our annual report. And so I would encourage everyone to go and read through that. There's a lot more detail than I will be able to provide today. Okay, so just to give you a little idea of the difference between a mandatory report and a complaint. Concerns that we receive through our written complaint form, which can be found through our website, are referred to as complaints by RHRA. The key differences between MRs, or mandatory reports, and complaints. Complaints cannot be anonymous. You need to identify who you are. You need to sign off on that complaint form. If you are making a complaint on behalf of a resident and you wish to receive information throughout the complaint process, you also need to sign. There needs to be some authorization form signed as part of that process. So anonymity is not an option for complaints. Another difference is that the scope of complaints is actually quite a bit larger. So while mandatory reports focus on those areas that we just went over under Section 75, complaints can be regarding any suspected issue under the Act or regulations. And commonly with complaints, we will see concerns with food that's being provided in the home, cleanliness or maintenance of a home, issues with pest control in a home. So these are things that don't technically fall under Section 75, but can be captured through a complaint. And lastly, and probably one of the main differences, or the main difference between a mandatory report and complaint, is that complaints are actually reviewable under certain circumstances by our external complaints review officer. So if we go through the process of a complaint and we work through that with the complainant and the home, if we ultimately decide that no further action will be taken, then the complainant has an option to request a review of how we've managed that complaint through our complaints review officer. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of an understanding of the differences. Okay, and I apologize, there's a lot of text on this slide, but I do want to give everyone an idea of how we manage the information that you may be reporting to us. So when I think about our internal process for mandatory reports, I really think of three kind of main streams. We have the receipt of the report and information, which includes our intake staff collecting as much information up front as possible. Our intake staff may be asking questions of the person reporting, requesting additional details about the situation. They will also provide you with a case number for future reference. So if you are making a report and are interested in following up and calling back at a later date, that case number is useful for your reference. We then have the part of the process that involves triaging that information. So we have, again, dedicated staff that would be reviewing the details that are collected up front. And the purpose of this review really is to determine what is the level of risk and impact on residents, and how serious is that matter. Through the triage, we actually have a standard set of questions that we will pose or try to determine. And from there, that allows us to establish whether or not there are red flags associated with this report or with this incident. So based on the outcome of that triage, we then get to basically our escalation or decision-making part of the process. And there's a couple different options we will have depending on what information is received and what our determination of risk and impact is. So we might be assigning the case for further inquiries, which again would be done by the same operations staff that reviewed that triage report. We might escalate that for inspection, and I've highlighted that because that's my area of expertise and something that we'll talk a bit more about. In very serious cases, we can initiate an investigation. And we can always make external referrals as well. So sometimes we will receive reports that potentially overlap with other agencies. And we think it is in the best interest of the resident to make a referral to those agencies. And so we will provide certain information to facilitate that referral, and hopefully those agencies can also take action to support the protection of residents. Okay, so to talk a bit more about inspections, just to give you some general information around how we conduct inspections. All of our inspections are done at a reasonable time and without notice. So we're not showing up in the middle of the night. We're in 99% of the time not showing up on weekends, but we are always going to show up without notice. Inspectors have a number of powers that they can exercise while conducting an inspection, including inspecting and accessing the entire premises, reviewing and inspecting the operations of the home. They can question any individual that they feel is relevant to that inspection, and they can review and collect documented evidence and records that might be kept at the home. So I will say another point of clarification that is important to make is the difference between an inspection and investigation. These are often confused, but essentially inspections are used to determine whether a retirement home is complying with the Act and regulations. Investigations, on the other hand, are typically used to determine if an offense under our Act, which is typically the more serious matters, have been committed, and whether or not that warrants further consideration. Typically that comes in the form of prosecution in a provincial offences court. So my team largely deals with inspections. However, we do have a few investigators on our staff as well that we can use as needed. Okay, so mandatory report inspections is one of our main type of inspections. And these are ones that I'm sure you guessed are conducted following the receipt of information through our mandatory report process. These inspections are always focused on any in-scope concerns. And so I've highlighted those two words because it is important to acknowledge sometimes we will receive information that is not necessarily in scope for us. And I know people reporting, will in many cases provide a wealth of information relating to concerns that they have about a retirement home. Unfortunately, from an inspection standpoint, we are only able to look at things that are in scope and relating to the requirements of our Act and regulations. As part of the inspection process, the inspector might be reaching out and contacting the person who made the initial report. Typically, that's done to either get a formal statement from them or clarify information before they go into the home and proceed with the rest of the inspection. As I mentioned, they will attend the home unannounced. They might speak to relevant parties, including residents, staff, and family. And I want to make note there that relevant is an important word here. I know a lot of times we have individuals making reports to us where they feel that we need to be speaking to a large number of people. The inspector is going to review all of that information, and it is very helpful when making a report to identify parties that you think may be relevant. Of course, the inspector is going to make a determination on who those relevant parties are and conduct interviews with those individuals. They might also review relevant documentation that's kept in the home, including resident care files, staff training records, various policies and procedures. Again, all of this is with the aim of determining whether or not the home has complied with the requirements of the Act. At the outset of the inspection process, the inspector will debrief with the home and advise them of the findings. So I should clarify, this is not, this is not an opportunity for a retirement home to formally uh, I'm sorry, lost my train of thought there. Anyways, this is not an opportunity for people to kind of reject findings that are put forward. It's really supposed to be a learning opportunity for the home, and it's really for the inspector to share with the home what the findings were. So were there areas that they want to provide education to the home on? Were there areas where there was overwhelming evidence that there was non-compliance, and therefore will be something that shows up on the inspection report? But it is a good opportunity for the home to ask questions around that finding. If the home does contest, which is the word I was trying to think of, if the home chooses to contest findings, there is an opportunity to do that after the debrief. And we have a formal process of review for contested findings. But ultimately, the retirement home will get a draft inspection report, and they will have a period of time to provide RHRA with an action plan for how they intend on dealing with any findings of non-compliance. And so for any operators on the call, I strongly encourage you to utilize that process. It's very important for us to see that you have taken any findings of non-compliance seriously and are starting to take action to address them. And those responses also may weigh in heavily in your favor as we get further down the process if further action is considered by RHRA. So after the draft report is provided and the time to respond has passed, RHRA will issue a final inspection report, and this is what gets ultimately posted publicly on our website. Okay, so just to give you a sense of some inspection numbers, over the past year, RHRA conducted a little under 1,200 inspections in total. Almost half of those were mandatory report inspections. So it definitely is one of our most commonly used inspection types. The number of mandatory report inspections have increased 40% over the last 3 years, so quite significantly. And you'll see the breakdown I've put on the screen there year over year to see essentially since the start of the COVID pandemic, the rise of mandatory reports. I think when we see numbers like this, it's instinctual to think that this means there are more incidents or more bad things happening in retirement homes. And I don't want to jump to that conclusion. I think more than anything, what these numbers show us is that there has been an increase in RHRA awareness, which is obviously a very good thing from our perspective. And that people who are learning about RHRA or operators of retirement homes are becoming more diligent with the requirements to report. So overall, while this results in more work for us, I do see this actually as quite a positive thing. And again, I want to thank really everyone on the call who has previously made a report for their diligence and for all of that information they've provided previously. Okay, so hopefully everyone on the call has seen our website, but if not, I would encourage you to go and visit www.rhra.ca. The next couple slides just are providing you with a visual for how to navigate through to our, what we call our retirement home database. So I've highlighted on this screen, this is our main kind of website screen. Right at the top banner, you'll see highlighted in yellow, there is a link to the database. When you navigate to the database, there is an option to search. And this is really where you would go and either enter in an address if you're unfamiliar with the home's name, but more often than not, likely the retirement home name you would be putting in there. So that is one way to search. In addition to the search functions, there is also the ability to filter through and identify homes of a certain size, identify homes that offer certain care services, and identify homes, probably most importantly, that are issued licenses to operate. And going one level down further, once you identify the home you're looking for and you go into their individual page, you will see a number of different options, but one of them is to expand the list of and links to final inspection reports that have been posted publicly. And so I would, again, encourage anyone who is interested in learning about their own home, their family's home, or if you are a prospective retirement home resident or family of a prospective resident, this is always a valuable space to learn more about the home that you might be considering. Okay, so as I noted before, all of our final inspection reports are posted to our database online, and they're grouped by retirement home. It is important to note that no personal or personal health information will ever be contained on a final inspection report. So we go through a review process to ensure that information is removed before it's posted publicly. We do try to provide as much information as we can to be transparent about what occurred during the inspection and what the findings of the inspection are, but obviously it's important for us to respect individual privacy, and so that information is omitted. Earlier this year, in May, we actually unrolled a new format for our final inspection reports. And so if there is non-compliance or issues identified by an inspector, this new format actually identifies more transparently the category of the concern that was reported. So was it abuse, was it neglect, improper care, or something else? It also identifies categories for any unrelated findings. And so I have a couple examples coming up, but in some cases, inspectors will go in for a specific reason, and while they're there, they make observations that are unrelated to the source of the concern or the initial concern. And those, in some cases, do end up on the reports as well. The new format also provides a separate area for legal language of our citations. So that's really the language straight out of the Retirement Homes Act and regulation. And we've separated that really to better highlight what we think is more useful information for the general public, which is the narrative of that finding. So again, what prompted the inspection? What did the inspector do as part of the inspection? And ultimately, what are their findings? And finally, the new format provides a separate area as well to reflect if certain non-compliance has been fully corrected now by a home. So in addition to increasing the transparency on the reports for the general public, we also want to give credit where credit is due to retirement homes that are taking prompt and appropriate action to correct any non-compliance. So the next two slides are excerpts from a report that has been posted using our new format. Unfortunately, I could not get the full report to fit on the page, and that would have made it even more difficult to read. And I will not be reading this line by line, but I did want to highlight a couple things. So the green box, you'll note, identifies the concern, and so that's at a fairly high level, but it does identify that the concern that was reported related to neglect of a resident. You'll see under the yellow box, this is the narrative of the finding that I referenced. And so you'll see this is language that the inspector has written out that details what the report was that was made to us, what they did in response to that report throughout their inspection, and then ultimately what they found through their inspection. So the outcome and the third box highlighted in red, these are standard text that we use to reflect basically the current state of a finding. And so in this case, the operator did not provide a response or provided a response that was inadequate from our perspective. And so the outcome for this specific finding remains as they still must take corrective action. And I will say we do have processes for following up on open or unaddressed non-compliance. So if you are reading through a report that's posted publicly and you see this outcome, rest assured there is a mechanism for us to follow up on that at a later date or during subsequent inspections. Okay, on the same report, I wanted to highlight that there was an additional finding made. So again, this is an area that wasn't necessarily reported to us as an issue, but it was something that the inspector observed as they were going through the evidence that they collected at the home. And in this case, it has to do with a certification for an individual at the home who was handling food for residents. I won't go through the finding, but as you'll see in the outcome box, the outcome is different from the last slide. And so this outcome reflects that, well, the licensee or the retirement home was initially non-compliant. They've since provided us with evidence to indicate they have taken corrective action. And so we would consider that matter addressed and closed. Okay, how am I on time here? Good. Okay, so I know I'm sure there are some questions. Before we get to those, I do want to say, obviously, if you have observed or witnessed a concern, if you suspect a concern that relates to resident risk of harm or harm, please make that report to us. Obviously, as I said at the beginning, the quicker that we receive that information, the quicker we're able to respond to it. And obviously, we are always going about our work through the lens of resident safety and protection. And so we very much value individuals who make those reports, and we very much appreciate the information that you can provide to us at that stage. And I've put up there the contact information for info@rhra.ca, which is really our main intake email. We also have our 1-855 number, which is monitored during regular business hours, and as well through an offline, or through a after hours answering service. So call any time of day. And then finally, I will just say we do have e-news advisories that our great communications team send out periodically. And so I would encourage anyone who's interested in receiving those e-news letter emails to send that email requesting being added to the distribution list. You can send that to info@rhra.ca. The really great thing about these advisories, whether you're a retirement home operator, family member, resident, it really helps you stay connected on kind of new initiatives that the RHRA is undertaking and any important communications that we are hoping to bring your attention to. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I would be more than happy to field any questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben, for enlightening all of us in regards to what happens when we call the RHRA. So I really appreciate that. I also truly appreciate our ongoing partnership. Myself and my colleague Rand do a lot of training for retirement homes across our vast province. So let's jump into the Q&As. So the first question is, are the residents that live and reside in retirement homes, are they deemed mandatory reporters?
So anyone who is aware of an incident should be reporting. From a legislation standpoint, while the language says any person must report, we're more concerned about enforcing the reporting requirements when it comes to retirement home operators. So, if a resident is not comfortable making a report, While I would encourage them again to make a report, even anonymously, there's not going to be any kind of repercussions for them not reporting. But yes, a resident can make a report, a family member can make a report, but most importantly, it's really retirement home operators that we are holding to that standard to report immediately.
Right. And we all know that one of the biggest barriers for staff in reporting cases of abuse, neglect, or mistreatment is negative retaliation by their colleagues, their coworkers. Could you speak on the safeguards in place for those staff that might be concerned about reporting and losing their jobs or any of those negative implications?
Absolutely, yeah. So our act contains what we call whistleblower protection. And so that essentially uh, outlines that no individual should be retaliated against for making a report to the RHRA or providing information to an inspector or another staff member of the RHRA. So if you feel that you have been retaliated against specifically because you've made a report, that is something we would very much like to be informed of, and is something that we potentially can take action on under that whistleblowing protection provision.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben. The next question is in regards to COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 absolutely had devastating effects on our most vulnerable. And this question is really important. So it reads, are there any public reports available regarding any investigations in the wrongdoings against residents during the COVID-19 lockdowns? If so, where can we find them? And if not, was there investigations leading to accountability regarding negative treatment and complaints from residents or family members? Were those followed up on?
Yeah, so as far as a consolidated report, I know we have definitely put information out there about the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the numbers and metrics that we we're tracking throughout. I will say we definitely received, as you saw from some of those numbers, an increase in mandatory reports throughout the pandemic. And in a number of those cases, that was relating to kind of mistreatment of residents and perhaps homes that were being maybe overly restrictive or emotionally abusive to residents. I don't want to say there was a whole lot of those situations, but any of those situations we did become aware of was something that we did follow our standard process for, and in many cases conducted inspections into, which, and I didn't have time to go into our full regulatory process, but when we do conduct an inspection, if there is a finding of non-compliance and if there is a serious kind of risk of harm to a resident, there are a number of regulatory and enforcement tools we can take. So we definitely did see a number of those tools utilized during the pandemic where we were not we're not comfortable with a home's actions or inactions in relation to how they manage the pandemic.
Thank you for answering that, Ben. I think really important to highlight and not forget the negative impacts against our seniors living in community and long-term care, as well as retirement homes too. Ben, this session has been really informative. I do want to highlight that, the RHRA is a wealth of information. They're not just the enforcers, they do support. So reach out to Ben. His contact information is here on the screen, and you'll be able to connect with him as well when you go back into the Feed Loop lobby and review his full bio and be able to connect there. Any questions for us, you can always reach out to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. We provide case consultations and do a lot of referrals for mandatory reports to the RHRA. So anyone calling with concerns about a retirement home, our advice is always to call the RHRA. Ben, thank you yet again. It was wonderful to partner with you. And everyone, thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of our conference. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.